going to ask you, will you be so kind? Say and spell your name to Denise. She probably doesn't know how to say and spell, right? Go for it.
My name is Chris Michaud. It's spelled Chris Michaud.
And your official title?
I'm a senior design architect and educational planner at Epstein Ewan Architects.
Excellent. And how long have you been in this role?
I've been doing this with EUA for a little over 8 years.
8 years. Wow. So close to a decade. And in this decade, do you specialize, forgive my ignorance, I assume that you probably do a lot with schools, right?
I do. I'm in our K-12 Learning Environment Studio. I've been working for 8 years designing schools, mainly in the K-12 market.
Fantastic. And school design, up until, I guess, 6 months ago, had a completely different feel. I'll just leave it as general as that, just to kind of get into this. And a different look.
Schools have been challenged nowadays to think about how they can bring kids back to school in the wake of this pandemic. A lot of that has to do with how you socially distance. So if you think about how this pandemic has affected us, we need to keep kids apart from one another, and that's a difficult thing to do. We need to think about surfaces and how those surfaces get sanitized, our hands, washing, how we create barriers such as masks. All this come into play, but the thing that has impacted schools the most really has to do with the lack of space in order to socially distance kids from one another.
We're seeing that struggle play out in many schools that are not going back virtually right now, dealing with these struggles. That's got to be really a difficult challenge as you move forward. And this pandemic is trying to reinvent the wheel almost. We do see challenges with this. There are some opportunities. You know, we've been, over the last 10 to 12 years, we've been designing modern learning environments which look very different from schools that probably you and I went to. These schools have the ability to be a little bit more flexible. So if you think of the schools that you and I went to, a series of classrooms loaded off of a quarter, you're either in the classroom or you're in the quarter. And that doesn't offer a lot of flexibility when you need to space out and when you need to control circulation and socially distant. The schools that we've designed are designed typically now as small learning communities where we have clusters of classrooms, and then there's an inherent flexibility built in with multiple spaces next to these classrooms. So they're connected to small group rooms and large group instruction spaces, maker spaces, outdoor learning environments. So from a learning point of view, the teachers have a lot of different space types to work with and a lot of places for students to learn, collaborate with one another, work in small groups, which all addresses modern learning. But what we're seeing nowadays with the pandemic is having the availability of these additional spaces, they're giving districts a little bit more latitude in how they address this pandemic, how they can space out their students and do in-school learning when they're challenged with all these spaces. You know, one thing that I've noticed is, the old format or the style to keep everyone kind of contained, kind of in a setting where, we're worried about maybe a terroristic threat or somebody coming into the building and locking it all down. Whereas now it sounds like maybe we would have a door out of every classroom to allow for fresh air and things like that, so you can have easy pickup and exit things of that nature.
Yeah, one of the main challenges obviously is space, but what goes along with that is circulation. So how students access the building at the beginning of the day, how they access their classroom, how they navigate the school throughout the course of the day, using the restroom, whether they're eating in a cafeteria or eating in their classroom, and then how they exit the school. So that whole idea of circulation is challenging for existing facilities. As we look at new facilities, we look at maybe there's a way in which we can be a little bit more intentional about how circulation works in the building. It may require adding an additional stair or widening the corridor just a little bit, but that would allow for future adaptability and flexibility, for future issues or pandemics.
What about
about like, I would imagine a lot of schools are probably like central air, they're not like air to air. I don't know, maybe they are all air to air. Talk to us a little bit about that and that struggle too.
No, you have to realize that schools have a long lifespan. You know, they're 50 plus years. Not all schools have forced air systems in them. And air quality is very important for this. So you'll see a lot of schools that have operable windows, they're going to be using them most likely to increase the fresh air. The modern schools that we're designing nowadays have systems that allow for a high rate of air change into the spaces. We're using high level filtration, and that all helps in both filtering out any contaminants in the air, as well as providing fresh air for the students throughout the course of the day.
Absolutely, it's so important to get that fresh air. And some other things I've been reading about, you know, maybe these are just minor modifications that can be made to existing buildings. Maybe you're suggesting these things at this point, but I've seen a lot of things about, you know, having doors that just open on their own, like automatic, I guess automatic doors, right? Or you know, installing sinks in every classroom. Would that be, is that kind of more the wave of the future?
Yeah, we see that, especially with sinks in the classrooms. Not just from a pandemic of being able to wash your hands all the time, but for instance, students with allergies have the ability for students to wash hands in the classroom. If lunch is being served in the classroom as opposed to going to the cafeteria during these pandemics, students have the ability to wash hands, do food service within the classrooms if they have some of those amenities there. Restroom use is another complicated thing because you're typically bringing entire classes to a restroom at one time. So creating a logical flow in and out of the restroom where there's minimal congestion. Designing restrooms so there is completely touchless operation, so touchless sinks, hand dryers or paper towels, restrooms without doors, or if there are doors, ones which swing in the out direction or have operators on, so you can go through that whole sequence without having to touch surfaces or minimize the amount of surface you touch.
It's a brave new world for everything that you've had to probably cobble together and think about. A lot of though you're probably taking from, I would imagine, the hotel industry and from other places that are already kind of pushed these models forward, though, right?
I probably wouldn't say we're pulling from the hotel industry, although there's probably some similarities with path of travel that you'll see in schools. I mean, really, what we're doing is one, reactionary to, you know, CDC recommendations, but also, you know, making the space work for districts. You know, they are challenged in multiple ways, and we're here to support them to figure out how they best can bring their students to school in a safe and effective manner, so everyone's okay.
Are you currently working on any? I mean, you've created blueprints, it looks like, and talked with educators. But are you working on any of these post-pandemic school plans already, putting them into practice just yet?
A lot of the things that we recommend or would recommend in a post-pandemic design world are things that we're already doing. If you look at the way in which we design flexibility into buildings to allow for that spacing out to occur. If you look at, for instance, cafeteria models, we're looking at schools where there's not a central cafeteria, where we have a distributed food service that occurs. And that initially is really because we want to create a better dining experience for kids. We don't want it to be very anxiety-inducing with a large space with lots of people, but break it down to smaller areas. But in a post-pandemic area, you know, we can now limit the amount of students in areas and control, you know, cross-traffic as much as possible by doing that.
Yeah, it sounds like you're having to get very creative with some of these, difficult decisions that have to be made, all in the effort to follow those CDC guidelines, at a critical time. What does your heart tell you about making these modifications during this time?
I think making modifications in buildings during this time is an important thing. You know, pandemics, this probably won't be the last one we go through. We can't design specifically for it, but we can be intelligent about how we design our spaces to accommodate a level of flexibility that makes it easier for districts to weather these storms, these pandemics.
Absolutely. And you know, toot your own horn. I know there was a $1 billion number that you guys had for how many schools that you typically work with and whatnot.
Yeah, we're really fortunate that we've been able to work with many school districts throughout Wisconsin. Since 2014, we've done about $1.5 billion worth of school design work.
And that is continuing as we speak. Are you feeling like you're busier now than prior to the pandemic, or is it just kind of a routine, regular amount?
I'd say it's probably regular and routine.
Okay, gotcha. I was just curious. You know, clearly though, I mean, I'm sure having to come up and conceptualize these changes probably kept you up a good couple of nights thinking about all of these, you know, trendy new ways that you're trying to keep everybody safe.
Yeah, you know, I mean, at the end of the day, we want to produce environments that first and foremost are safe for students and teachers, and environments that promote modern learning and the ability for students to really have some agency and take control of their education and explore fun and exciting things and enjoy being students, enjoy being in school.
Absolutely, and it sounds like everything that you've really thought about here really does keep the enjoyment still there. In fact, it might even be more enjoyable having all these automatic little features and having smaller, you know, ratios and whatnot, you know, with everyone. So might be a better thing. Me just pontificating there. Denise, what am I forgetting to ask that you think would be important to share? Chris, anything that you think I've forgotten to ask that you think would be part of the feature?
I'm trying to think. Anything you want me to expand on?
I think it was good. I think that hitting on and hitting home on like a lot of the design is not changing much, right? It's
Okay.
really.
It sounds like it's those add-ons, those, you know, things that are there. But there are certainly some things that maybe.
Yeah, I mean, there's add-ons where you can, you know, tweak and further develop, evolve education design, and that is always occurring. I think the important thing, though, is to make sure that you maintain flexibility and adaptability in the spaces you're designing. You have to design them for multiple things, and keeping that in mind, your school district's going to be better off in the future.
And I'm sure you never thought you'd be planning for a pandemic here. So that was never part of the frame of mind when you were putting these ideas together. So
No.
absolutely. I probably have plenty with that. I probably just need to grab some nice